Nintendo won't be showing off new hardware at E3.
And here's why that's probably a good thing.
Hot take!
Nintendo just had a really big earnings call where they dropped some information that made Nintendo fans everywhere sad. They're not going to be showing off new hardware at E3.
Yeah, they just released their fiscal yearly earnings, and Nintendo CEO Shintaro Furukawa, he said that, okay, no, they're not going to be showing off new hardware at E3. They are working on new hardware.
Yeah.
But what's going on here? Should we be worried? Or what?
See, okay, like, we're big fans. Everybody wants to see new hardware at E3, but there are some little bits of information that were leaked out at this call that kind of painted a picture for Nintendo about why that's probably not a good idea now, at least what Adam and I assume would be a bad idea to release new hardware right now. But to keep everybody on track, we've been talking about this for a little while now. There's supposed to be a Lite Switch model that we're calling the Lite Switch, because they have to call it that, and there's supposed to be a Pro model. Now, Bloomberg reported that there wasn't going to be a Pro model coming out right away because there were some issues with it.
Yeah, that's right. So while they had said that, they said that the Pro hardware wasn't going to be coming out anytime soon, they did say that they expected to see the Lite Switch come out sometime in June, which, I mean, can kind of technically still happen and not be at E3, but I doubt it.
Well, you know what? I think there's a reason why, even if they do have new hardware, they might not necessarily want to announce that at E3 as well. But
around that, we'll get back to that first. So, do you want to talk a little bit about what happened as far as the fiscal report was concerned?
This is number heavy, folks, but trust me, this is very important, and it kind of explains something that's probably going to be pretty exciting for some Nintendo fans.
We'll try not to dig too deep into the technicalities of things. So, for the fiscal year that had just ended, the fiscal year just ended for Nintendo, they wanted to sell a specific number of Switches. For the longest time, everyone was saying, the Switch hardware has to hit a 20 million sales mark. Nintendo didn't get quite close to that, and they, in fact, wound up renewing their expectations for how many Switches they were going to sell. They renewed it to 17 million, and in this report, they almost hit that. They got super duper close at 16.95 million. Overall, even though they didn't hit their 20 million sales mark, it is up 12.7% year on year.
Yeah.
So it is good.
Yeah.
But it's not as good as what financial analysts assumed at first that they would do.
Everyone that's paying attention knows the Switch is doing well. The problem right now is with, investors and stuff, they're basically saying numbers that they're not hitting, even though they are very good numbers to begin with. It's just there's a lot of stuff here that's kind of in flux. They expect the Switch to be doing better than it is, even though the Switch is already doing pretty good. And that does matter in the marketplace, but not so much to fans. As everybody knows, the Switch in North America is the fastest selling video game console of all time, but that isn't the same case everywhere else in the world, but it still is doing very well.
So looking forward, where I would say that they're being they're really grabbing for that 20 million, let's say, with this last fiscal year. They're being a little more conservative, and that does have analysts worried. So they're aiming to sell around 18 million Switches with this new fiscal year, and I'm fairly certain that they can hit that mark. 16.95 million Switches is still quite great, but it all sort of depends on what we see for the system, right? We always talk about how important software is. Now, in their fiscal report, they did talk about some of the titles that are coming to the Switch this year, and they left out some as well, which is weird. Mario Maker 2 is coming in June. Fire Emblem Three Houses, I'm all about that, is coming in July. Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield have a tentative date of 2019.
It's probably going to be one of the biggest game franchises that ever get released on the Switch.
Right, so we'll probably see a lot of console sales from that alone. And again, Pokemon games are normally released by the end of the year, so we'll probably see that sometime in like November or whatever. Animal Crossing is still supposed to be coming out in 2019, though there have been rumors otherwise. And then The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening as well.
Which I think is a dark horse. I know people like Zelda to begin with, but you got to understand, what happened with Switch was the launch title for that platform was a Zelda game. So I think there's a lot of people there that want more of that experience, so it just makes sense for that to happen.
Yep. So while there are some great things coming to the Switch, we are seeing the 3DS, like in this fiscal report, there was a decrease in sales for the 3DS and for software rather, and that's to be expected. I mean, it's going out to pasture. The 3DS is a very, very old system at this point. In this fiscal year, they sold about 2.5 million units of the 3DS, and the forecast for next year is only 1 million. So yeah, it's Nintendo saying they're only going to sell about 1 million.
It's true. Where the Switch or where the 3DS is at right now is not nearly as high as the DS, and it looks like the 3DS is about to wrap up, and that's it. So why investors might be a little bit worried is because they may have thought that the 3DS and the Switch could have lived side by side and kind of complemented one another. But as Adam and I had spoken about several times, when you've got the Switch, you don't need the 3DS. Now, of course, there's games on the 3DS that aren't on the Switch, but the problem is having two portable systems. You're always going to choose one. Very few people out there. I've never met anyone that carries around a 3DS and a Switch at the same time. Though, if they did, they probably would have like two really giant pockets.
Sure. Yeah. Cargo pants everywhere.
Yeah.
So, like, the 3DS going away, it could be seen as a bad thing, depending on where Switch goes with their hardware next. If the Lite Switch has some other sort of functionality that could get people to buy that other console, that could be great for them. But overall, when we were talking about the 3DS kind of going away and being in a one sort of console, both handheld and home console for Nintendo world, we were talking about how there was a bit of a necessity for the development that was going on with the 3DS to be pulled over to the Switch in just the titles that are coming. We need a lot of software to compensate for what was a very strong branch for Nintendo.
Yeah. Now look, this is going to get really complex, but you got to understand something that is really important to understand. What Nintendo is worried about right now, what investors are worried about, is taking all of their usual predictable home console market and portable console market and merging it into one. The Switch needs to sell massively well because not only does it have to make up for home console, but it has to make up for mobile. We've talked about this several times before. And where the Wii U and the 3DS together are not really a powerful market, the DS and the Wii together were huge. They sold so many of those systems. And their their sequel systems didn't sell nearly as much as the ones that came before it. So the Switch has to kind of do two things at once, and investors are worried because of that. But Nintendo has been taking steps to make this stuff happen, including working with Tencent.
That's right. So Tencent was another thing that Shintaro Furukawa had spoken about after the fiscal report was revealed. He had said that all of the data that they had in the fiscal report and the forecast for the future doesn't take into consideration whatever projections could be there with Tencent, because it's a very weird landscape. So bringing the Switch into China is no small feat. Right now, the hardware is under review, and just getting any outside like media into China, especially like a video game console, there's a fine, everything's finely combed over. So not only does the Switch have to go through a rigorous review process, but software titles as well. So we don't know exactly when it's going to launch in China. We don't know what software is going to be there. And then there's other worries as well, like you had spoken about, the audience in China.
So here's the thing. China's a big market, and if the Switch is successful in China, it can add huge numbers to the user base, and it can make the Switch one of the most successful consoles of all time. That's how big of a deal this is. The problem is nobody knows if consoles will be able to sell well in China because there really isn't data there.
They haven't had consoles in China. It's so bizarre for us to be saying that in the year 2019.
They've had systems. The problem is certain systems got released and didn't have huge libraries because there's huge restrictions. Plus, games get restricted in China for a variety of different reasons. Certain games have gambling restrictions, so they don't allow certain games to exist there. Blood and violence can sometimes prevent a game from being released. And believe it or not, we don't know for certain, but a game like Pokemon, the new ones that are being released on Switch, if those games are considered gambling in any way, then the Chinese government will stop them from coming out, and that will have a major impact in the Chinese region.
So if... like, that's one branch of what could make the Switch huge. And I tend to lean positive. I think that if the Switch does get released in China, it will do well. They're used to a mobile market.
Yes.
But speaking of a mobile market, Nintendo, like, a part of me is thinking that Nintendo's sort of leaning on the branch of mobile to possibly get in some of that old 3DS revenue that they're not going to be having. They're bringing some larger titles to phones. We've already seen things like Animal Crossing, Fire Emblem, okay, and other titles as well. We're getting that Mario Kart mobile game, which I think it has the potential to be really big.
See, there are games that Nintendo has released on mobile platforms, and a lot of people out there just say Pokemon Go, but Pokemon Go wasn't exactly Nintendo. It was another company working with Nintendo and stuff like that, so it's a little bit different. But the truth of the matter is, there's a lot of stuff here that can really have an impact on the way on the way Nintendo deals with things. Now, Adam, what you said about mobile phones and stuff, that makes a lot of sense. Look, as weird as it is, mobile phones could become the DS for Nintendo moving forward, and the Switch is their home console bread and butter.
Right, exactly. It all depends on that software that's coming to phones. We're also going to be having a Dr. Mario game. Again, we can laugh about whatever software is coming to what platform, but until we see what it is, who knows?
Yeah.
Things just explode sometimes and make a lot of money, right?
I'm a traditionalist. When I think about Nintendo, I think about their consoles, I think about their well-constructed games, and I personally have never been really excited or loved any of the mobile games that they've produced, not one of them. And that's just me. It's because I've had a better gameplay experience from other games. I'm not going to knock Pokemon Go. It's successful. It's done very well. But for me personally, those games don't ring to me like the other ones do on the Switch. And with that in mind, right, the Switch probably shouldn't be having a brand new console or iteration get announced at E3 for a variety of reasons.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for getting back to that, because that was like the bulk of what we wanted to discuss today. What's going on at E3? What are we like 99.9999% sure is going to happen at E3, Shane?
Microsoft's probably going to show off their next console.
Yeah.
And that's not a good time to show off anything from the Nintendo Switch.
Especially, take this into consideration, if it is an iteration of the console that isn't all that notable, if the Lite isn't, as groundbreaking, or if they did have a Pro version around on the horizon and it looked very similar to what was already being offered. No, you don't want to show that off when they're like, no, this is the complete next gen of consoles. You would be a footnote. What Nintendo has to do right now is focus on software. That's it. If you want to sell consoles, you can make another iteration of a console, but if there's nothing to play on that new fancy console, no one's going to pick it up. Right now, we already talked about some of the lineup that's going to be coming out. There's a new Luigi's Mansion game that's going to be coming out as well. Metroid Prime Trilogy, Metroid Prime 4. We're probably not going to hear about for a while, but we need more stuff.
And look, I can hear you screaming online.
What are they saying?
I'm not an Xbox fan. Why do I care about that? I want to see the new hardware. Well, in this instance, you don't matter nearly as much as the investors do. And unfortunately, where we wouldn't care too much about that, because we can obviously tell the difference between a Lite Switch and an Xbox, specifically an actual Lite version of the Switch, not a physical Lite Switch. Okay, this idea here is so important, because if Microsoft comes to the table with a whole bunch of developers, which we know they're going to come to the table with, they're going to show off a bunch of games, they're going to show off bleeding edge graphics and new hardware, they're going to show off things that are going to look light years ahead of the Switch. When you do something like that, and investors see that, suddenly they get cold feet. That's why they can't do that. Coming out a month after, or even another month after that, and showing off the Lite version of the Switch at that point, that would be a far better gamble. Plus, this isn't like you're going to have to be dealing with a bunch of other companies. Sony is not going to be showing off new hardware at E3 because they're simply not going to E3. So all the effort of all the journalism and our journalists and everything there is going to be focused squarely on Xbox and the newer, more impressive hardware that they're likely going to be announcing.
Even if you're not a fan of Xbox, like Shane had said already, them showing off these consoles is the beginning of the next generation. If nothing else, it is a symbolic big deal, because it's the next wave of consoles. You're speaking about them possibly releasing the other iterations of the Switch consoles afterwards. Historically, we've seen that. We've seen in E3 2014, Nintendo said they weren't going to be showing off new hardware. They didn't. And then 2 months or a month and a half or so later, they showed off what became the new 3DS. So could they possibly show another iteration? Yeah, and there's proof that they've done that in the past.
Specifically when it comes to Microsoft, why I think it's such a dangerous time for them to show off the new hardware is because they're going to be showing off what we imagine to be a lesser version of the already existing Switch, and Microsoft is going to be like showing tons of things. Like, you got to understand this. We know that Microsoft bought a bunch of companies, and apparently at E3 they're going to be showing off 3 more that they bought, or more than that. If they show off more companies and they say, look, here's a bunch of games exclusively coming to Xbox, they haven't done that since the original Xbox One launch. You know what I mean? Like, they have not done that in a really long time. Right after the Xbox One came out, they fumbled, they had so many issues, there wasn't a lot of exclusives. The ones that did come out ended up coming out to PC, and like, I guess Halo 5, I guess, didn't come out, maybe that?
Oh, onto the PC?
Yeah.
Is Rare Replay on PC?
I guess Rare Replay too. Look,
You have a reason to buy it.
It's like they're basically, Microsoft is so worried about having their next system not work that they are investing tons of money, tons of time, and I think they have resources beyond any of the other companies that are actually making video game consoles right now. That doesn't mean they're going to be successful. It just means they're going to be doing everything they possibly can to attract consumers. So for Nintendo to show off anything at this point, it's probably not a wise move. Holding their hand holding their hand back and just waiting until a month is the best case to do this. Plus, if they get more announcements coming down of games and stuff at E3, that's the best idea. You can show off the best graphics in the world, but it doesn't matter how good the graphics look. Microsoft is never going to have a Pokemon game. Microsoft is never going to have a Metroid game. Microsoft's never going to have an Animal Crossing game. And Nintendo needs to show off, I would say, at E3, a lot more games that are coming to the platform. Exciting things that we're not expecting, so that it can attract more people to the Switch platform and keep sales going. Because we see that the sales are continuing to grow. They're not slumping. So I personally don't think there's a reason for them to announce a new refresh of the line until we start to see some slowing down of sales.
Yeah, that's right. You're very, very correct. They have the power of the characters, the IP. Nintendo has some things in their back pocket that we haven't seen for a long time. Could there be another Kid Icarus game? That'd be kind of cool. I'm still kind of holding out hope that there will be a moment in a press conference where someone from Microsoft and Nintendo are both on stage at the same time. And if that happened, that would be huge news, and then maybe some of whatever could happen from a deal would trickle into whatever new hardware would be coming a little later on.
It's really
anything
weird.
could happen.
It
man.
is. We don't really know what kind of relationship Microsoft has with Nintendo.
We know it's positive.
We know it's positive.
Yes.
That's all we know.
Cuphead.
Microsoft has been talking a lot about Nintendo
Minecraft.
over and over again. In fact, during the earnings call, Nintendo talked about Google Stadia, and they said it's really impressive, and we're so welcoming of new technology, but we don't think it's going to work out for them. Like, why would you say that? You know, it's a really weird time for them. I think personally that I don't believe we're going to see Nintendo come up onto the stage for Microsoft. I just don't think that's going to happen.
I don't know.
But I do believe there's going to be a couple more announcements about Microsoft trying to be more of a worldwide publisher for games and less than a complete focus on their own hardware, and just having their hardware as kind of a staple for things to be released on.
That seems like where they're going. They seem to be taking their Microsoft games and Xbox as a whole, and they just want to be sort of more of a service than a home console. But we have to wait and see what we end up with at E3. Maybe we're completely wrong, and it is all about the scarlet line of consoles.
We could be. Look, the real only competition that Nintendo has with the Switch is other consoles, but the other consoles at this current moment are not portable, so Switch has a huge benefit. This is why the Switch is doing way better in Japan than the PlayStation 4, because a lot of consumers in Japan don't have the space for the PlayStation 4, and they simply don't want to use one. Having the game systems portable is a far better thing. That's why the Vita was so successful in Japan, because it was a portable system.
Well, more successful than
more successful.
PSP. The PSP was huge.
Yeah.
But yeah, and this is also why I could see the Switch doing very well in China, because they're used to a mobile gaming market. I think about things, not just like home and space, but like public transit. People
Yes.
are like always on the go and stuff, and you want your gaming on the go as well. The Switch is perfect for that. So yeah, we're gonna see what happens. Maybe we'll have another fiscal report talk next
could.
year, and we'll be like, well, they did everything right.
If there's one thing that you can take from this fiscal report, it's that Nintendo is doing very well with their system,
Yes.
and they're just trying to figure out what that metric is. Their conservative numbers are probably healthy for investors because they can see something and go, okay, we know they're going to at least hit that number. Because every time they say they're going to hit a number and they don't hit it, it scares investors.
Right.
This time around, it's going to be something that they could possibly surpass.
It's wild because analysts were upset when they didn't, of course, hit the 20 million mark, and now that they're dialing things back and they think that they're going to sell 18 million Switches, analysts are saying you're being too conservative. They got to find the sweet spot in there, I guess.
Yeah.
Because like either way, people seem to be upset.
So, folks, are you upset that you're not going to be seeing a new version of the Nintendo Switch announced over at E3? Or are you happy because this just means that the Switch is doing well and we'll probably get one anyway a couple months after? Let us know what you think.